Hello, boys and girls and children of all ages. Fat Bastard Wannabe Buddha coming at you today. Today's discussion is, well, tomorrow is November 22nd, which is an actual historical date for this country for a lot of people who believe that's the day democracy died in this country. Truthfully, I'm not one of those people. I was never a huge fan of the JFK conspiracies or JFK assassination, and I truthfully didn't think it was that big of a deal. And it's probably going to upset a lot of y'all individuals out here that may watch this thing, but I truthfully didn't see that as that important of a thing. Even though I come from a family that this was central. This was one of the central things that we used to argue about constantly when I was a young little kid. And inside my family, they fundamentally did believe my uncle, my grandmother. My mother, I'm not really that sure about it. She sort of avoided this one for some reason, but she never talked that much about it. But my uncle, my grandmother fundamentally believed that John F. Kennedy was killed by an organized conspiracy of, by and large, either economic, military, and banking elites for the sole purpose of stopping some of the reforms that he was doing. Now, I fundamentally believe that JFK was the beginning of Thatcherism and the beginning of Ronald Reagan and a rollback of the New Deal, but that's my opinion of it. Most people don't accept that one. They believe he was a darling that was going to set America back on the true path of, maybe get back to greenbacks, which is the new conspiracy with him. The conspiracy that I used to hear in the 70s and the 80s when I used to argue with my grandmother and my uncle was that he was going to get us out of Vietnam. And the sad truth of the matter is John F. Kennedy was not going to get us out of Vietnam. There wasn't. And no matter how I kept pointing out over and over and over again that he was actually ramping up and was in the process of ramping up there and also doing overthrows in this region, especially which is now Dominican Republic and other areas of overthrowing legitimate democratic governments, they sort of didn't want to hear that. Nor when I pointed out that JFK was sold out Khrushchev. That's right, boys and girls. Khrushchev actually came to the Kennedy administration in secret and told them that they no mas, that the Cold War was over, but they didn't want to end the Cold War. They didn't want to end the Cold War at all, And then you had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was basically Khrushchev saying, "Hey, pull your missiles out of Turkey, and we'll pull our missiles out of Cuba, and then we could do some détente and roll this back." But we took it upon ourselves to absolutely humiliate Khrushchev, so we continued the Cold War for another 20 to 30 years, which was great economic boon for our military-industrial complex. But people don't hear that. What is interesting is my grandmother was an actual shut-in. I was a shut-in for a long period of time, about 10, 15 years, and it's part of my family, I guess. We are very antisocial and don't like going out. My grandmother didn't like going out, and basically after her husband died, pretty much for a long period of time, barricaded her. She forced herself to work when she had to, and then she barricaded herself into her house for 40, 50 years until she unfortunately passed away. But one of the few times she actually got out was to go see Oliver Stone's JFK, which was sort of unusual, that she was willing to go out and brave her agoraphobia to have her prejudice confirmed that JFK was killed by a cabal of banking and economic and military interests, which was I never understood that about one of the things that always fascinated me about arguing inside of my family is how much they got hung up on the JFK conspiracy, how much they got hung up on this one little incident, and I would point out over and over how the Rand corporations ran documents in during the Vietnam, and they wouldn't hear it, and they didn't really concern themselves about that. Or when the Trilateral Coalition pointed out that there was a crisis in democracy, the whole purpose of the modern effort was to insulate public decisions from the masses. That they had a little bit too much democracy going on in the 60s, and in a lot of ways that was brought about with the horrors of the JFK assassination. If you didn't have the horror of the JFK assassination, I don't think you get a lot of the other development that we got, and a lot of that was positive development, to be the devil's advocate for a lot of things. If JFK was allowed to continue out his terms, I doubt very seriously if you would have had the 67, 64 civil rights bills or the Fair Housing Acts. I don't think you get that. I don't think you get that to the 70s. I fundamentally don't think you get that. I don't think you get Medicare and Medicaid. I don't think you get food stamps. I don't think you get the new society out of JFK. He was a rich corporate toady. That's what he was. He's a Wall Street Democrat, and that's what, in many ways, everybody talks that Obama is a Rockefeller Republican. Well, JFK was a Rockefeller Republican before it was cool, I guess, and that's what you would have got after with a continuation of the JFK. But what I do find interesting is how certain conspiracies appeal to certain individuals. And the JFK conspiracies, and I can speak of, appeals greatly to the good government, good liberal Democrats. They want to believe that there was this shining knight that could have, should have, and would have, saved everything for them. And I seen that firsthand. Or the Obama is a Kenyan descent, that somehow that nativism strain of American populism, that xenophobia, that talking point works so great amongst that community. Or this hyper intellectualism that I find myself amongst the left. Really love the conspiracies about after World War II, how the CIA or the OSS was propping up and overthrowing democratic governments in Italy and Greece, and installing a bunch of fascists that were sympathetic to the old Hitler business community that we just overthrew. But that's who won World War II for us on the left. We're hypersensitive to those conspiracies. Those are the conspiracies that we like, or we like those conspiracies that point out that there was an organized campaign in the late 60s, early 70s by the business community in order to separate public decision making from policy, and it continues today with the most recent trade negotiations that we're fixing to sign. We really like those conspiracies, and those are the conspiracies that we sort of latch on. And I find it interesting why certain conspiracies are tailored towards certain individual groups. Why my family got so obsessed about the Kennedy assassination. Well, why were they waiting so much for the man on the white horse to save them? Because if you look at the record, Kennedy wasn't that guy. He wasn't going to get you out of Vietnam, and he wasn't going to give you, abolish the Federal Reserve, which is a more recent talking point. It wasn't going to happen. And for amusingly, the right wing is hyper obsessive about, that Obama's not an American. Well, Obama's the quintessential American. He's a corporate Wall Street wannabe who's basically a toady for the business establishment. And that I can sort of see why they get fixated on that, and I can sort of see why, maybe to a degree, the liberals get fixated on JFK. But that was what I was going to talk to you about today, and I'm curious what other people think. Thank you very much for your time and effort. Have a good day.